Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at AI.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be tackling the question of will open source or closed source approaches dominate AI in the long run?
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a big question. And we've got this analysis here that really digs into both models, and it gets pretty interesting.
Yeah, the implications are huge. I mean, this goes way beyond just the tech world. This is about who controls the development of AI, how accessible these powerful tools will be, and even what the potential economic and social impacts could be.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So before we dive into those big picture questions, can we just break down the basics? What actually is the difference between open and closed source AI?
So at its core, open source AI is all about transparency. Like imagine a blueprint that's open for anyone to see and modify and use. So the code, the models, the data, it's all out there publicly available.
So anyone could tinker with cutting-edge AI.
Yeah, and that leads to some really exciting possibilities.
It sounds a little chaotic, though.
It can be, but that's kind of where the magic happens.
Yeah.
You've got thousands of minds all working together, spotting bugs, suggesting improvements, and building on each other's work.
So you're saying this type of collaborative development can lead to faster innovation?
Oh yeah, definitely. Faster than traditional models.
So it's like a global brainstorming session for AI, constantly pushing the boundaries.
Exactly. And because it's open, there are way fewer barriers to entry.
Okay.
Startups, researchers, students, they can all access these tools without needing massive budgets. We've even seen evidence that this accessibility has fueled a surge in AI development all over the world, even in parts of the world that might not have had the resources to compete before.
Wow, that's incredible. It's really leveling the playing field then in a way that wouldn't even be possible with closed source AI, right?
Right. With closed source, the code is proprietary. It's like a trade secret, tightly controlled by a company. This approach has its advantages too, of course. But it also raises concerns about who has access to this tech and how it's being used.
So closed source is more about protecting intellectual property and maybe profits too.
Yes, companies investing in closed source AI have a strong incentive to safeguard their algorithms and data. It gives them a competitive edge and allows them to monetize their innovations through licensing or product sales.
Okay, I'm starting to see the appeal of both sides.
Yeah.
Open source is like fostering rapid innovation and broad accessibility, while closed source lets companies protect their investments and generate revenue to fuel more research.
Precisely. And it's not always so black and white either. There are hybrid approaches emerging where companies might release certain parts of their code as open source while keeping other elements proprietary.
It sounds like the lines are getting blurry.
They are.
That makes predicting the future even more complex.
Yeah.
But before we jump into who might win this open versus closed race, let's dig a little deeper into the strengths of each approach. What are some of the biggest advantages of open source?
Well, aside from the collaborative development we talked about, there's also a powerful network effect. The more people use and contribute to a platform, the better it becomes.
Makes sense.
This can lead to a rapid accumulation of knowledge and improvements that wouldn't be possible within the confines of a single company.
It's like the wisdom of the crowd, but applied to AI development. You've got all these eyes on the code, catching errors, contributing new ideas. I imagine that leads to some pretty robust and reliable systems over time.
Yeah, it certainly can. And because these systems are built on open standards, they're usually more interoperable,
Okay.
meaning they can easily integrate with other tools and platforms. And that flexibility is super valuable in a field that's constantly evolving.
So open source not only drives innovation, but also creates a more connected and adaptable AI ecosystem. It sounds pretty compelling.
It is.
But closed source has its own set of strengths, too. What are some of the arguments in favor of that approach?
Well, one of the biggest advantages is the potential for focused investment and development. Companies like Google and Microsoft, they have deep pockets, and they can pour resources into pushing the boundaries of AI in ways that might not be possible for a decentralized open source community.
So it's about having the resources to attract top talent, build state-of-the-art infrastructure, and really zero in on solving specific problems.
Exactly. Closed source allows those companies to create a closed loop of innovation,
Okay.
where profits from successful products can be reinvested into further research and development. This can lead to breakthroughs that might take much longer to emerge in the open source world.
And there's also the whole issue of quality control, right? In a closed system, you have a dedicated team responsible for making sure the AI is reliable and performing well. And that's not always easy to achieve with a distributed open source project.
That's true. Closed source companies can implement rigorous testing and quality assurance processes, which contribute to the robustness and stability of their products. This is super important in applications where safety and reliability are really, really important, like self-driving cars or medical diagnosis systems.
Okay, so both approaches have some serious advantages. Open source is all about collaboration, agility, and accessibility, while closed source allows for focused investment, tighter control over intellectual property, and potentially stronger quality control.
You got it. And this is where things get really interesting because the long-term success of each model depends on how these advantages play out in the real world.
Yeah.
Which approach will drive the most impactful innovations? Which one will shape the societal and economic landscape of the future?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And luckily, we've got a whole analysis to help us unpack it. But first, let's take a quick look at some real-world examples of open and closed source AI in action. I'm particularly interested in how these two models are playing out in the development of specific AI tools and platforms.
That's a great place to start. Let's dive into some specific examples that illustrate the strengths and challenges of each approach. So when it comes to real-world examples, you can see open-source AI thriving in platforms like TensorFlow and PyTorch.
Oh yeah, those names are everywhere. Can you give us a quick rundown on those?
Sure. So TensorFlow actually started as an internal tool developed by Google. But in 2015, they made a kind of groundbreaking decision to release it as open source.
Wow, I bet that shook things up.
It did. It opened the floodgates for a global community of developers to contribute to its evolution. Now, TensorFlow is one of the most widely used deep learning frameworks out there. It powers everything from cutting-edge research to commercial applications you probably use every day without even realizing it.
That really shows what the open source approach can achieve, doesn't it?
It
A
does.
single company, even one as big as Google, might not have been able to make that kind of impact on their own.
Exactly. And then you have PyTorch, which came out of Facebook's AI research lab. What's interesting about PyTorch is that it was designed with a more dynamic and user-friendly approach to coding, which made it really popular among researchers and developers.
So both of those are great examples of open source AI flourishing.
Right.
What's happening on the closed source side?
Well, one of the most notable examples, and one that's been generating a lot of buzz, is GPT-4 from OpenAI.
GPT-4. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
You probably have.
Yeah.
It's been making headlines for its ability to generate human-quality text.
Oh, yeah. I've seen some pretty crazy examples of what GPT-4 can do. It can write poems, code, even hold pretty convincing conversations.
Right.
But I think there's been some controversy around it too, right?
There has. Despite all its impressive capabilities, GPT-4 is still largely a closed system. The details of its training data and algorithms are kept secret, which has raised concerns about transparency and potential biases.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if it's a bit of a trade-off. On the one hand, you have these remarkable advances being made with closed-source AI, but on the other hand, there's a lack of openness that makes it hard to understand how these systems work and what their limitations might be.
Exactly. It's not just about which approach is quote-unquote better from a technical standpoint. It's about weighing the benefits of fast innovation against the need for transparency, accountability, and wider access to these technologies.
Okay, so you've got these two forces, open source and closed source, both shaping the AI landscape. But ultimately, which one is likely to have the bigger impact in the future?
That's the million-dollar question. And analysts seem to think that open source AI has a significant edge, particularly in fast-moving fields like AI. The speed at which the open source community can iterate, identify solutions, and adapt to new challenges is something that traditional closed-source development models struggle to match.
That makes sense. It's like evolution in action. The open source ecosystem is constantly adapting based on the input of a massive network of contributors.
Exactly. And this rapid evolution isn't just about technical improvements. It also has implications for the economic landscape.
Right.
By democratizing access to AI tools and lowering the barriers to entry, open source has the potential to unleash a wave of innovation from unexpected corners of the world.
So you're saying we could see new startups, new industries, even new economic models as a result of wider access to AI?
Absolutely. Imagine a world where entrepreneurs in developing countries have the same access to cutting-edge AI tools as their counterparts in Silicon Valley. That's the kind of potential that open source unlocks. It's not just about building better AI, it's about making AI available to everyone.
That's a pretty powerful vision, but realistically, can open source truly compete with the resources and infrastructure of those giant tech companies that dominate the closed source world?
It's a good question. The open source model has its own challenges, mainly around sustainability and long-term support.
Right.
While the initial development of an open source project can be really dynamic, maintaining that momentum and ensuring consistent quality control over time can be tricky.
Especially when you're relying on a volunteer workforce. You don't have the same kind of control over deadlines or quality standards that you would in a traditional company.
That's one of the trade-offs.
Yeah.
But despite those challenges, the open source movement has shown an amazing ability to adapt and find creative solutions. We're seeing new models of open source collaboration emerge, with organizations like the Linux Foundation providing structure and support for critical open source projects.
So it's not just a free-for-all. There are ways to bring some order to the chaos and ensure that these projects can thrive.
Exactly. And don't forget that the line between open and closed source is becoming increasingly blurred.
Okay.
We're seeing more companies embrace a hybrid approach, incorporating open source tools and frameworks into their own closed systems. This lets them benefit from the dynamism of the open source community while still keeping control over their core intellectual property.
So the future of AI might not be a clear-cut victory for one side or the other.
Probably not.
It's more likely to be a dynamic blend of the two, with companies and communities finding ways to collaborate and compete.
I think that's right. And as this all plays out, we need to be mindful of the broader societal implications. It's not just about who builds the best AI. It's about ensuring that these technologies are developed and used in a way that benefits humanity.
That brings up a really crucial point, the ethical considerations surrounding AI development. We touched on this earlier with GPT-4, but it's a topic that deserves a much deeper look. How do open and closed source approaches impact the ethics of AI, and what can we do to make sure these technologies are developed responsibly?
That's a complex question, and one that's generating a lot of discussion and debate. There are arguments to be made on both sides, but ultimately I think it comes down to transparency and accountability.
Okay, so how do open and closed source models differ when it comes to transparency and accountability in AI?
So we were talking about how open and closed source models differ when it comes to transparency and accountability in AI.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really where the two models diverge.
Okay, so walk me through it.
Well, with open source AI, everything's out in the open. The code's right there for anyone to see. That means researchers, ethicists, even just regular people who are interested can look at the code and check for potential biases or problems. It's like having a global team of auditors making sure everything's okay.
So you're saying that open source has a kind of built-in safeguard against AI going off the rails?
It can, yeah. Having that level of transparency makes it much harder for those harmful biases to slip through or for companies to use AI in unethical ways. I mean, it's not a perfect system, of course,
Right.
but it definitely helps create a more accountable environment.
That makes sense. What about closed source, though? How do those companies handle the ethical side of things?
That's the tricky part. With closed source AI, a lot of it is kept secret. Companies don't want to reveal their algorithms or their training data,
Sure, I get that.
but that makes it a lot harder for outsiders to evaluate the ethical implications.
So it's kind of like a black box. You don't really know what's happening inside or how those systems are making decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And that lack of transparency can be a real concern, especially as AI becomes more common in sensitive areas like healthcare or finance or even criminal justice.
Makes you wonder who's holding those closed source companies accountable. Are they doing enough to ensure that their AI is being used ethically?
That's a huge question right now, and there's a lot of debate about it.
Yeah.
We're starting to see more calls for regulation and ethical guidelines for AI, but it's still pretty early days.
It feels like we're at this really important point. We have this incredibly powerful technology that could change so many things about our lives, but we have to be careful. We need to make sure that AI is developed and used in a way that's responsible and aligns with our values.
Absolutely. It's not just about the technology itself. It's about the choices we make as a society,
Yeah.
about how we want AI to fit into our world.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into open versus closed source AI, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What should people be thinking about as they navigate this increasingly AI-powered world?
Well, I think the biggest thing is to stay informed and stay curious. Don't just blindly accept whatever AI-powered solutions are out there. Ask questions about those systems. Where did they come from? How are they trained? Who's benefiting from their use?
So it's about being more aware and more discerning about the AI we're interacting with.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to think critically about the role you want AI to play in your life and in society as a whole.
It's important to remember that the future of AI isn't set in stone. It's something we're all creating together through the choices we make and the conversations we have.
Well said. The future of AI is not something that just happens to us. We all have a role to play in making sure it's a future that benefits everyone.
And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into open versus closed source AI. Thanks for joining us. We hope this has given you some new things to think about, and we'll see you next time.